Okay, 2 Kings chapter 18. About the bike ride, we need help with the kitchen, preparing food and so forth, and serving it, and also for drivers. So if you can help in those areas, please see us after the service, okay? Didn't tell you what we needed earlier. Okay, 2 Kings chapter 18. We have 2 more Wednesday nights in this study. And so tonight we're going to try to finish this. The forecast is always cloudy and stuff like this, but we hope that we can and give it to you, and then we'll move on to the last one next Wednesday night. But it's important that you learn how to wait upon God. Let me ask you a question. How do people sometimes respond during times of waiting? What are some of the ways in which they tend to respond? Drive your husband nuts. Okay, that's a good one. Do what? Impatience. Okay. Anybody else? Oh yeah, I got to do something. I can't wait. Okay, and let me give you 2 words to write down. There's one up here on the screen. But often when people are waiting, they tend to have 2 extreme responses. First of all, a response by being their response is they are consumed with the issue. They're consumed with it. It just consumes every part of their waking time. They're just consumed with it. They can't move beyond it in all the points of references. And the other extreme is they displace it. They displace it by just, I don't want to think about it, so I'm going to do something else, so I won't think about it. And both of those can be problematic because when you're consumed with it, it's like being in a cul-de-sac of your own thinking. And this is especially true if you're going through something that you're not sharing with other people. The value in bringing other people into it is that sometimes, if you can envision a road that dead ends into a cul-de-sac. And sometimes when you're waiting for something, just a word picture here, it's like driving into it and you're going around and around and around and you can't find the exit because you're waiting and you pick up speed and you become disoriented. And sometimes by bringing somebody else into the equation, it can really help, and sometimes in enormous ways. Sometimes we get consumed with it. Other times we simply displace it. I don't want to think about it. I'm going to ignore it, and until sometimes you have to deal with it eventually. Now, last week we gave you a working definition. I think it's in your bulletin and your outline, but we're going to review it very quickly. Waiting on God is the patient endurance to do what is right and possible until God makes additional provision or gives additional instructions. Waiting upon God is actually not a very passive activity. When I'm waiting upon God, I am fulfilling my obligations in the moment as I wait for Him to show me what the next right thing is. Okay? So don't view waiting upon God as a time of simply going into neutral. Okay, neutral. Going to put everything in neutral and just coast until something comes up. Now, last week we talked about the events of chapters 18 and 19 here, which was the coming down of Sennacherib down here to the south. He comes down here, wipes out all these from the northern country. It comes down around the bottom, comes up to block off Jerusalem from their support down in Egypt, and then attacks them, and then a very difficult position. Now, last week we just mentioned to you 2 things. First of all, the absence of waiting, which was in that first section in the scriptures, chapter 18, 13 through 16. Worth you at least remembering this, that the absence of waiting was self-centeredness and self-reliance. That when there's an absence of waiting, when I'm not really waiting upon God, I am centered upon myself. I'm thinking just of myself. I am inward focused and I am inward reliant. Whenever I become inward focused and inward reliant, I'm inevitably going to make the wrong choice, okay? Or wrong response, because it's all about me. How do I feel? What do I think? What do I want? Think about it. What do I feel? What do I think? What do I want? Well, what you feel and what you want, even what you think, is of simply minimal value. In fact, can be a negative value in your life when it eclipses what God thinks, what God feels, and what God wants. Okay? So we have to be careful of the absence of waiting. Then we talked about the enemy of waiting, and there were a couple of those, the next three of those, okay? Appearance, intimidation, and ridicule from chapter 18, verses 17 to 37. That sometimes we are, what attacks us is we see the appearance of something and it overwhelms us, okay? Or we're intimidated, or we feel ridiculed by somebody, and their responses sometimes trigger to us a response that makes it more difficult to wait upon God because we are consumed with the opinion of others. Now listen to me, all of us are conscious of how other people think, what other people think. We all are conscious of it. If it wasn't, some of you men would still have leisure suits or bell-bottom pants. You may still have those, but you're smart enough not to wear them anymore, okay? Because we are conscious of other people. And that's not a totally bad thing because that's how societies operate. But the danger is during times that we have to wait upon God, sometimes we can rely upon the opinion of others to give us the wisdom we need as opposed to waiting upon God. Okay? That was last week. Now this week, we're going to talk about actually the practice of, and that's the message tonight in chapter 19, the practice of waiting. So I want to encourage you tonight because there is no simple solution to complex problems. You need to remember this, okay? There are no simple solutions to complex problems, all right? And you have to remember there are dynamics at play in all of our lives. We're waiting upon God, and you can't figure it all out. In our counseling ministry we have here at Still Waters, when people come from out of town, out of state, or out of country for counseling, by the time they come to here on the Outer Banks, they're not coming here to vacation, to sit by the dock of the bay or to enjoy the sunset. They are here because they are on their last leg. Their lives are usually messed up. It's not always messed up really bad, but a lot of times really complex, okay? And you cannot have a simple solution if there are multiple complex intersections in your life. You have to deal with them systematically as God leads you, okay? And so it's a work, and it's work waiting upon God. So tonight, if you're waiting for God to do something, you're waiting for God to show up, waiting for God to solve a problem, to meet a need, to relieve a burden, whatever it might be. Can I just be honest with you? And I've been honest the whole time, by the way, but to this point, to highlight to you that it is hard. And the fact that you're struggling is not a sign that you're not trusting God. The fact that you're wrestling with it is not a sign that you're being carnal. It could be that you're you have this abiding issue that you're waiting for God to show you what to do next. And that can be challenging. Now, with that said, here's what's happened, okay? Here's the Reader's Digest version of chapter 18, okay? So you have this king, Syrian king, okay? And he comes down, okay? And he's trying to conquer Jerusalem. And he comes down and he holds them hostage. He says, listen, give me money. And what happens is, again, just as a word picture, he says, here's the ransom. You give me $10,000, I'll leave you alone. And just like that, boom, he gives him $10,000 because he goes in to the temple and he takes all the gold and everything, gives him the money. Well, then the king winds up thinking, well, wait a minute. If you gave me that money so quickly, you must have plenty of money. So he comes back and says, no, that's not good enough for me, okay? You know, it's basically he was paying protection money. Remember the illustration last week about protection money? Okay, so he's giving protection money. Well, if you can give me that money so quickly, you must have a lot of money hidden in there. I want to come in and I want to get everything. I'm going for everything. I mean, might as well, because you're hopeless here. You're helpless. Okay, and so he comes in and he sends his leaders to ridicule them and to make them fearful. So Sennacherib comes and tries to do that. And so now in chapter 19, okay, you have the internal battle that's happening in Jerusalem, okay? They've gotten this news at the end of chapter 18, this threat, particularly in chapter 18, verses 33 to 37. They insulted God and basically saying, listen, do you think God can help you? It's like this. It's like saying that, let's say, not to offend anybody that lives in Southern Shores, but it's up there. Okay, so this king is from Southern Shores, okay? And the kingdom of Kitty Hawk and the kingdom of Kill Devil Hills and the kingdom of Nag's Head have all been taken by him. And now he's going to go over to the kingdom of Manio and try to conquer it. And when he goes there, he says to them, listen, you think all these different countries, Kitty Hawk and Kill Devil Hills and Nag's Head, they all had their own gods. And they all had their system of worship. And their God didn't save them. And do you think in the world your God's going to save you? You're fooling yourself. Now I'm again paraphrasing, just trying to simplify the story in your mind. Okay, that's what was happening here. And he says it on Facebook and Twitter at the same time. In other words, what he does is he says it so the people on the wall holding guard can hear it in their language. And of course, it creates all kinds of turmoil in the city, okay? And so in light of that, we're in chapter 19, verse 1. The first thing you see when you're this, and how Hezekiah does it here, is the first thing you see is the practice of seeking. In verses 1 to 7, okay? He is seeking, and he's seeking God, but understand there are three qualities here, okay? So let's read it and then we'll talk about it. So verse 1, and it came to pass when King Hezekiah heard it, that he rent his clothes and covered himself with sackcloth and went in to the house of God. And he sent Eliakim, which was over the household, and Shebna, the scribe, and the elders, and the priest, covered with sackcloth, to Isaiah. By the way, this is the first time Isaiah appears in the narrative, but he's been in ministry now for 2 or 3 previous reigns of kings, okay? But this is the first time he's in this narrative, the narratives here in Kings. The prophet, the son of Amos. And they said unto him, thus saith Hezekiah, this day is the day of trouble, and of rebuke and blasphemy, for the children are come to the birth, and there is no strength to bring forth. Now, what you see here, here's the first, 1, 2, and 3. First of all, you see a selfless seeking. A selfless. He is renting his clothes. He's the king, okay? And they're covering it with sackcloth, and he is abandoning self-reliance. When I'm seeking God, I have to be willing to be selfless. I can't go to God when I'm waiting on a heavy burden. This is a heavy burden I'm carrying right here, a heavy thing. I really need God to work here. I can't come to God with both the burden and the solution and the method the solution can find. I just can't do that. I've got to be selfless. God, and next Monday, when you spend your hour in prayer, when you pour out your heart before God, and you don't have to wait till next Monday to do that, you do realize that, I hope. But when you pour out your heart with the God, do not try to solve the problem. If you could solve the problem, you'd have just done it yourself. But you can't solve it. You need God. And so there's a selflessness here in his prayer. And then you notice not only a selfish, but the honesty of it. Okay? It says, it may be the Lord thy God will hear. That it may be that the Lord thy God will hear all the words of Rabshakeh. That was the spokesman for the Assyrian king, whom the king of Assyria, his master, had sent to reproach the living God, and will reprove his words, which the Lord thy God hath heard. Wherefore lift up thy prayer to the remnant that are left. So the servant of the king of Hezekiah came to Isaiah. Now what he's being honest about is this, that he needs God to hear him. and he needs God to act. He's honest about where he's at. Do you know, when God brings you and brings me to the end of our rope, he brings us to the best place we can ever be. Not the best place we like to be. No. I don't like to be at the end of my rope. I like to have a cushion, don't you? I like to have a little bit of buffer so it's not so critical. When you're at the end of the rope, that's a critical place to be. But you have to be honest with where you're at. God, if you don't move, it will not happen. There is a depth and a clarity to his seeking. He seeks selflessly, he speaks honestly, but he also is now seeking by trusting. Look at verse 6. And Isaiah said unto them, thus shall ye say to your master, thus saith the Lord, be not afraid of the words thou hast heard. He is now going to have to trust. He's trusting in this narrative. You'll see as it unfolds. He's trusting that God will comfort his fear, which is serving the king of Assyria hath blasphemed. Behold, I will send a blast upon him, and he shall hear a rumor, and shall return to his own land, and will cause him to fall by the sword in his own land. You see, what he's being told is that he is being told to trust God. Trust that God is going to do it. And trust not to be afraid. And in verse 6, and then in verse 7, that God will send what you need. Let me ask you a question. When you're seeking God, are you trusting him to meet your deepest fear at your greatest moment of uncertainty? Are you trusting him to meet your need? And then, are you trusting him to send the blast, send what is needed? Now, one of the things you find when you read the Bible through, and one of the things I was struck with last year when we read through the Bible through 4 times, was how reading elongated passages of Scripture at one time, was how different God works every time. How few times in the Gospels did Jesus spit on the ground and get mud and put it in the eyes of the person? How many few times he came to saying, rise to Lazarus and come out? I mean, he operated so differently in every situation. But what we tend to do is this, do we not? God worked in the past, and we like the way it turned out. So now we're waiting upon God here, and we're expecting God to do the same thing over here. But God's going to do something different here in this case, unique to this case, just like he's going to do in your situation, when you wait upon him, when you trust him, when you're honest with him, and when you seek him selflessly. So in this first section, there is a seeking to adapt to the truth that was given. Okay? And then, letter B, the practice of letting go. Now, in verses 8 and 9, we're not going to read that because there's a time just trying to get through that if we can. But 8 and 9, he is letting go of what is uncontrollable. So what happens here is the ambassador from the king of Syria has given his speech here to the people in Jerusalem. They haven't responded, so he goes back to his king. But his king now has his own problems. His king has been sidetracked to go off and have another battle and all of that. So there's a lot of things going on that they can't control. Listen to me. When you're waiting upon God, you're going to see or hear, or there's going to be a lot of stuff happening in the peripheral part of your life and in the other people's lives that are uncontrollable to you. You have nothing to do with. Now, why that's important is this. When we're waiting upon God, often we're tempted to jump the gun and reach out and try to control things that we're not supposed to control, and we really can't control. You see, verses 7, 6, 8, and 9 was part of God's plan here, but he really doesn't show it. But look, if you would, please. Well, we are going to read verse 4. I'm not going to read it. But that's what happens there, okay? So he's uncontrollable. And then, okay, you let go of illegitimate options. Okay, now look at verse 10. Thus shall ye speak to Hezekiah, king of Judah, saying, let not thy God, in whom thou trust, deceive thee. Now watch this. In verses 8 and 9, things are happening that Hezekiah cannot do anything about, has no responsibility in. But here, there's illegitimate thinking in verses 10 through 13 that he's being exposed to, and the king has to reject. So I have to let go of what I can't control and let go of the illegitimate thoughts that come into my life I'm exposed to that can draw me off of God's will. That's one of the reasons why if you're going through a difficult time of waiting, I encourage you to get the book, The Knowledge of the Holy. If you have it, I encourage you to start reading it. If you don't have it, I encourage you to get one tonight. If you don't have any money to get it, then just take it. And because it is a book that talks about who God is, okay? And I encourage people who are going through difficult times to get one of two books, and both of them are good. One is the Knowledge of the Holy. The other is the emergency pack that we have back there from the Wilds. And both of them are designed to bring your mind back thinking right about God. Because what's happening here in verses 10 through 13, he's being challenged to think wrong about God. And the devil will do that to you when you're waiting. And then number 3, in the letter C, the practice of praying. Now, notice a couple things about this prayer. First of all, it was purposeful praying. Look at verse 14. Hezekiah received the letter in the hand of the messenger and read it, and Hezekiah went up unto the house of the Lord and spread it before him. That's the letter he got back from the other king. So he is purposeful. He is going to the house of God. Why do we have our monthly day of prayer and fasting? Not because you're not only supposed to pray that day, but it's to help bring your mind to a purposeful sense of talking to God. Not just multitasking, not just lay me down, now that I lay me down to sleep, I pray the Lord my soul to keep. Not just Lord bless this family, but you going before God with your burden and pouring it out to Him purposefully. And then there is an exclusivity here. There's exclusively here in verse 15. Look what he says in verse 15. And Hezekiah prayed before the Lord and said, O Lord God of Israel. Now it's exclusive in two ways. First of all, the first Lord there is referring to Yahweh, Jehovah, the name specific to intimacy, immediacy, and presence of God. I'm coming to you, God, just you. And not only you, the God, but the God of Israel. You're my God. So there's an exclusivity to this prayer. I'm coming to you as my God. You're the God of the universe. You're my God. I'm going to the one who has the authority and the ability to do anything. So when I pray purposely, but I pray exclusively. I am coming to you, and I'm pouring my heart out to you. I'm pouring my burden out to you. I'm pouring my situation out to you, and I am trusting in you and you alone. And then, of course, there is specificity, specifically, okay? And so then verses 16 down to verse 19, he goes into specific request. I want to encourage you, next Monday when you pray for an hour, next Monday when you fast and pray with great specificity about whatever it is your heart is broken over. And then next, the practice of dependence in verses 20 down to verse 36. We're just going to have time to give you this, and then we'll have to move on. You can read it if you'd like to. This might be a chapter to read through next Monday during your hour of prayer, or throughout the day. He depends upon 3 things. In verse 20, he depends upon the power of God. The power of God. Second, he depends upon the holiness of God. And third, he depends upon the justice of God. That God is able to do it. Isaiah said to the son of Amos, sent unto Hezekiah, saying, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, that which thou hast prayed to me against Sennacherib, king of Assyria, I have heard. You see, he's going to now have to depend upon God. He's saying, God is going to be able to take care of this. He's heard my prayer. Okay? And a reference to his holiness in verses 21 and 22. And then his justice in verses 23 to 28. That God, in fact, is going to work this out through his power, through his holiness, and through his justice. You see, because here's the problem with our burdens, when they're waiting upon. Sometimes we are so consumed with our burden that we view it detached from our God. I just need this removed. I need this changed. I need this displaced. Whatever your burden may be. And those are really issues you're working through, okay? But be careful that you don't forget the power of God and the holiness of God and the justice of God. God is going to do what is right. God is always going to do what is right. He's going to do what's right in your situation and in my situation. We have to trust him with that, okay? The practice of dependence. And then lastly, let me just give this, and this is the omnipotence of God. The fact that God is over everything. And what happens here, okay, look at verse 34, okay? Just point that out. I will defend this city to save it for my own sake and for my servant David's sake. And what happens is God defeats them without one shot being given. He confuses them and they leave. In their confusion, they leave. And when he gets back in verses 37 and 37, Sennacherib is killed. He dies. Okay? So God completely fulfills his plan at this time for these people. Now here's what you got to be careful about. Not only reading Scripture, but in hearing what God does in other people's lives. Be careful that you don't use Facebook as your standard of judging the God's work. Now, here's what I mean by this, okay? It's not an anti-Facebook comment, just here's what I mean by that. In Facebook, if you're not careful, you can scroll down and see all these highlights, the best of series of everybody's life, and compare yourself to that and think, my life is terrible. Now, you can do the same thing when you hear God work. Well, God did a wonderful thing. God did this, and God did that, and God did that. That all may be true and all different, but that's not your situation. When you're waiting upon God, do not wait for God to send you a carbon copy, for the old people, a carbon copy of somebody else's deliverance. He's going to deliver for you in his way and his timing. Okay? And so when you wait upon him, don't wait with a preconceived notion of what deliverance means, because you don't know what it means. You don't know what it means. You don't. A good friend of mine in Raleigh, his wife was battling a physical illness, and he got up one time during the service and said, I know God has told me this is going to happen, and I try to be gracious. I was gracious, when a guy's struggling, you got to give him sometimes a wide berth just to work things through. And it didn't work out at all like he thought it was going to work out, because it wasn't God's plan. All of us have unloaded our hearts, no doubt, and our burdens, seeking God to do something. And God does something, but he does not what we'd like to have happen. Not what we would want to have happen. Sometimes he demands things from us we don't want to give. Wait upon him. So I want to just encourage you tonight, as we close, okay, that you practice it by seeking him. So really don't underestimate this. And by the way, seeking him is not the same as simply just staying so busy you can't think about it, okay? or worrying about it. Remember this, you might want to write this down. Worrying about something is not the same as praying about something. Worrying about something is not the same as praying about something. When you're praying about something, you're bringing it to Him. The act of asking, seeking, and knocking.